Hello, and thank you for joining this AT&T Bootstrap Week session. Today's Bootstrap Integrating Gimbal's SDK into Your Mobile Apps is presented by Gary Dam. And we may have Sid from Gimbal join as well to present. Before we begin, I would like to tell you a little bit about the functionality of WebEx. In the right-hand panel, there are two windows you should be aware of during the presentation. First is the chat window. Please utilize the chat function if you have any issues with the presentation, such as sound or display issues. Second is the Q&A window. Please utilize the Q&A window to ask your questions throughout the presentation. We will close today's presentation with a live Q&A where Sid and Gary will answer your questions in real time. Also, please be aware that this is a live event and will be recorded. If you do not want to participate in a recorded event, please disconnect now. Finally, please visit developer.att.com for information on AT&T technologies and APIs, industry events like the AT&T Developer Summit, local hackathons, dev labs, and technical webinars like this. Now, without further delay, the Gimbal team will take the floor.
Thanks, Andrea. My name is Gary Dam. I'm a Senior Director of Engineering at Gimbal. And what we're going to cover today is integrating Gimbal's SDK into an iOS application. And then my coworker, Sid, will also cover real-world beacon deployments with Gimbal beacons on real-world deployments that we've done and lessons learned. To start off, I'll let you if you'd like to navigate there or just follow along on the screen, we'll start out at gimbal.com, which has links to the main tools that we'll be using for the demonstration. Gimbal is a mobile engagement platform. The primary features are related to geofencing, Bluetooth smart beacons, and a lightweight notification system that can trigger off events from the previous two features. And some of the key differentiators around beacons and geofencing that you would get as part of the platforms themselves, iOS or Android, are primarily server-side management and an end-to-end solution, including analytics for your events and features that you're using in Gimbal. So what we're going to do today is we're going to actually integrate into a sample application, Gimbal's SDK. The tools that we're going to use for that are Gimbal's developer portal. You can see on the screen right now, I'm at gimbal.com's website, and from there on the top right, there's a link to the developer login. So once you're at the Gimbal Manager portal, you obviously need an account. To create an account at the Manager portal, you fill in this form. It takes a few required fields and sign up. And once you've done that, you'll end up on the sign-in page. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in with my account, and I'm going to choose the demo organization that I've created to do our demonstration today. You're going to land on what we call our applications page at this point. So I'm going to pause right here. This is the manager. Once you have an account and you're logged in, this is where you're going to be working within Gimbal's Developer Portal Manager. And what I'm going to follow today as part of the demonstration is a sample application that we're hosting on GitHub. So if you were to navigate to github.com/GimbalInc, you would see two sample applications, one for iOS and one for Android. We're going to go through the iOS application today. The Android application as well is available here, and the feature set that we're going to see on iOS is comparable on Android. So the demo apps themselves behave in a similar way. So what you're going to see here on iOS, you can also download the sample application for Android that I just clicked on here and run this in Android Studio, and you'll have a similar demo to what you're going to see on iOS. Just wanted to point that out in case we have anybody on the phone interested in walking through this on Android when we're finished. Okay, so once once we click into the sample application, and you see we have an actual Xcode project that you can clone from this site. And then there's a README here with some bullets, and we're going to basically just follow these sample bullets here, and what we're going to end up with when we're finished is a sample application. And the application itself doesn't have a UI. You're not going to be able to see my phone, but the app itself will log to Xcode's console, and we'll be able to see the place events that are happening from the Gimbal beacon that I'm going to use for the demonstration in the Xcode console and the log. So first thing, again, is we're going to jump back to the Gimbal Manager. This is our developer portal that we logged into a couple minutes ago. And again, that's at manager.gimbal.com. Once you're logged in here, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an application. In the top right, there's a button, a new application button. We're working with iOS, so we'll choose iOS as the platform. And then the bundle ID you're going to want to use is defined here in the sample app. As you download it, the bundle ID that it's configured with is com.gimbal.hello Gimbal iOS. You can copy that right out of GitHub. In the manager, paste that in. If you were developing your own application, obviously you would use your bundle identifier here. And we would generate that app. So what we end up with here, the key thing that we end up with here that we're going to come back to is the API key that we're going to actually embed into the application. But while we're here, we're going to do two other things. I'm going to jump back to GitHub so you can see what steps I'm following here. And the next piece that we're going to do is we're going to create what we call in Gimbal a place. Now, a place is an abstraction around either a geofence or a grouping of one or more beacons. And so if you don't have Gimbal beacons available for the demonstration, you can accomplish the same thing that we're about to do in this demonstration by creating a geofence inside the Gimbal Manager. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. And if you're interested in buying Gimbal beacons, you can go to store.gimbal.com, which is linked right here. And I'm going to use our Series 10 beacons, a very small, like fob footprint, about the size of a quarter, and they're available for $5 here at store.gimbal.com. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do after creating that place is creating a communicate in the manager. This is for, again, for the lightweight notifications. And then we're going to download the SDK, and then we're going to jump into Xcode. So I'm going to jump into Manager. And the easiest way to create a beacon place is to simply go to Beacons and activate one. Now, activating a beacon is just simply giving it a name, a human-readable name that will be meaningful to you and or useful to you in your application. And then secondarily, it is entering what we call the factory ID. And I'm clicking on the little question mark here on the right that explains what a factory ID is. Inside our Series 10s, for instance, there's a sticker in there, and this on the sticker is the factory ID. So I'm kind of moving my cursor over that. This is the factory ID. I'm going to enter the factory ID as a beacon here that I'm using for this demo into the factory ID field. So that's my factory ID. And this next checkbox here is telling it, hey, when you activate this beacon, just go ahead and create a place for me. In our version 2 of the SDK, to get place events through the SDK, you do need to create a place. This will do it for you. It'll name the place the same name that you've given to your beacon here, and it'll just work. So we'll click Activate the Beacon. The beacon's activated. And just to show you, if we go to Places, you see now that we have a place called Gary Demo Beacon. If you were to create a new place and you wanted to create a place with a geofence like we were hinting at earlier, you would simply go into the Places, New Place button in the upper right. You'd go ahead and give that a name. You would select New Geofence. You would enter an address. And then you would define the geofence, for instance, radius, if you wanted to use radial. We also support polygonal, and you could define the points for your polygonal diagonal geofence, and then you would go ahead and create your place. So for the purposes of our demo, we're just going to use the beacon place, which is already created here. And then the last thing we're going to do is go ahead and create what we call communication. Communication will translate into a place, when we get a place event on the device, which is independent of any kind of notification or messaging. It's just telling me that I came into proximity of the beacon. What the communication represents is the actual notification, in the case of iOS, a local notification that will be sent when the event happens if I've defined one. So we'll call this hello hack. We will go ahead and start the valid dates for that as today. We have triggers. Places are triggers for what we call communicates. The type is @ You can also trigger them on a leave event. We're going to do it for an @ event on a specific place called my demo beacon. So we're going to pick the place of the beacon that we just created. And then the last thing is to go ahead and create a title and description for that, and that's the last bit of required information for what we call communicate. And if I save and publish that, then that's all ready to go. So at this point, we're pretty much finished with everything that we need to be doing on the Gimbal Manager to make this work. So we activated a beacon, we created an application, and we created a communicate. To receive place events, creating the communicate was not required at all. There are the two key links here that you would be interested in. One is documentation. I'm going to jump into that real quick and just show you that, for instance, for iOS v2, which is the version of the SDK that we're demoing here, the full developer guide is available here at gimbal.com/doc, and then you would navigate to iOS version 2 developer guide. This is the full documentation for the SDK that we're about to demo. The other link that you'll be interested in here is the download of the actual SDK. So the sample app does not have the Gimbal framework embedded in it. You will need to download the SDK from this link here. And if you just go to the link and you click on the iOS SDK, it will download for you the latest version. That's a zip. And when you unzip that, you'll be able to get to the framework that we're going to need for this. So now that we have everything we need, let's go back to GitHub. The first section of the demonstration is complete. And what we're going to do next is we're going to open Xcode with this sample application. And we're going to go ahead and see some place events here from our beacon. So the next step would be to go ahead and copy the clone URL for this project. I have that here already. I'm going to go ahead and clone that here locally into my workspace. I'm going to go to that project. Now that I've cloned it, hello Gimbal iOS. Maybe hard to see that, but not critical. And then I'm going to double click the Xcode project, which is going to open Xcode with that sample project. Okay. So here I'm in Xcode, and I have my Hello Gimbal iOS project. I'm going to jump back to GitHub, show you what we're going to do here. We're going to, in the app delegate, to initialize Gimbal, you'll need to set your API key that we created in the Gimbal Manager. We're going to add the Gimbal framework. And then to enable detection of these Bluetooth smart beacons in the background, we're going to go ahead and turn on the uses Bluetooth LE accessories background mode. So we'll do those three things, and then we should be able to run our application. So back in Xcode, open the app delegate, and I can see here for Gimbal, I have a set API key call. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the Gimbal Manager and the application that we created. And so you'll see here again, choose the one for the correct bundle ID, which is COM Gimbal Hello Gimbal iOS. The API keys here, there's a button next to it to copy it. Click that button, it will tell me that it's been copied to my clipboard. If I go back into Xcode, I can paste that API key right in here where it says set API key. Okay, now that we have the API key in, the next thing we'll do is we will bring the framework, the Gimbal framework, into the app. So the latest Gimbal SDK is 2.1, or 2.12, sorry. And inside of there, there's a folder called Frameworks, and inside of that, there's a Gimbal framework. So if I drag that into my Frameworks directory in my project, it's asking me about some options for bringing that in. I want to make sure I select the copy items into the project so I don't have any references outside of my project to that framework. Okay, and then we'll see here that once I choose open there, it'll bring Gimbal.framework into the project. And then the last thing that I want to do for this application is under capabilities, under background modes, to make sure this can work in the background. I want to select background modes, uses Bluetooth LE accessories. Okay, so once I have that selected and I have a device connected which supports Bluetooth Smart, which I have an iPhone 5 connected to this running iOS 8. What I'll be able to do at this point is go ahead and run the application. Now this part, the application's starting up, and what you'll see that you can't see on the screen right now, but if you run the sample, you'll see that iOS is going to ask if I want to allow this application to access location even when I'm not using the app. So this is a background location permission. Because we do location and we do it in the background, you're going to have to allow that. There is a setting here in iOS in the info P list. There's a message. So when this permission is required, you're going to have to set called NS location always usage description. The app already has it set as part of the sample application. And we put a nice message in here for you, which I'm seeing on my screen right now, and I'm going to click Allow. So now the application is running on my phone. You can see in the console that nothing's happening. And we're going to move on to the next step here, which is now when I come into proximity of a beacon, what you're going to see is we get these two callbacks from our place manager, which we initialized here in the sample app. So after we set the API key, we created a place manager. It's a property of our delegate. And then we set ourselves as a delegate of that place manager, which is going to allow callbacks for these place events on this app delegate. And then I tell the place manager to start monitoring. And what I also did was call the communication manager and tell it to allow it to start receiving communications. That's an optional step if you're just trying to receive place events. That's not required. And then these are the two delegate callbacks for Gimbal. One is when you, what we call begin a visit. So the first time you encounter a beacon, this callback's going to get called. And then after some interval, which by default on our SDK is 30 seconds, you'll receive an end to that visit. So you'll receive an event when you no longer see that beacon or when you're no longer in proximity to it. So we're all set, and what I'm going to do right now is turn my beacon on, and the physical beacon is here, but it's not powered up. So when I power it up, it's in a pairing mode where it's programmable by the owner for about 5 seconds, and then it turns on. And what you should be seeing here in the console, and you know what? Let me go into preferences and make sure that you're all able to see this well. Okay, so in the console here, what happened was we just got called back by our delegate. And this log begin our visit is what you're seeing here. And then it's printing the description of the place that we received as part of that visit. And the place, as you can see, is the demo beacon that we created in the Gimbal Manager. So to complete the demo, what we'll do here is we'll power down the beacon, which will mimic us departing it or no longer being in proximity to the beacon where the device can detect it. And again, right now the departure interval is set to 30 seconds. So once it's powered down, it'll take 30 seconds for the device to issue us the end event here, which we'll see in a second. And while we're waiting on that, I'm going to jump back into the manager and point something out here. So part of what we try to do is we try to make, once the app is created and deployed, the configuration around Gimbal, as well as adding beacons and geofences, is all done server-side. So there's no reason to upgrade your application and redeploy it to your users when those are the things that you want to be doing. I want to point out for our applications that we created in the manager, some of these place detection settings for beacons that are here. These are the defaults that I was referring to. The departure interval here, which I think is probably different. There we go. Hopefully you can still see that. I had to zoom out a little so that it was visible in the text box here. The departure interval is 30 seconds. That can be changed, and the signal strength at which you arrive and depart can be changed. We try to tweak these so that they work well for most use cases. So hopefully in general you don't have to mess with this, but if you need to, the ability to do that is here, and I wanted to show that. If we go back to Xcode, what we'll see is, okay, 30 seconds after I took the battery out of the beacon, so we're no longer detecting it, I was issued the end event for my visit. So for that same beacon now, I've departed it. So these two callbacks. So with this little bit of code here, maybe 10 lines of code, we're able to integrate with the Gimbal SDK and using its place manager, get callbacks for events for beacons and or geofences, depending on what you've configured in the Gimbal Manager. That's pretty much it. I want to point out something else that is difficult without you being able to see the phone, but we've already enabled the app to actually receive what we call communication. So if I was to put this app in the background, which I'll do now, you won't see it because you'll see here there's no logging related to it. But when I arrive again at this beacon, even though the app is in the background, I'll receive the event again. I just put the app in the background. You may have heard it. I received a local notification on the phone as well, and it was the notification that we created as a communicate in the Gimbal Manager. So that's it for the iOS demonstration. Go back here. Again, this sample is at github.com/GimbalInc. And I'm going to jump back over to WebEx and see if there are any questions here. Okay, so on the chat, see if there are any questions. So anybody that's online, or there's a QA section in WebEx as well. So if you have questions for me, you can go ahead and submit them in there or add to the chat. Give it a couple of seconds here, see if anybody responds. If there aren't any questions, okay. I did just get one in the QA. Let me repeat this question here, and then I'll respond to it. Could you please review some of the common use cases for using Gimbal Tech? Okay. So first of all, let me point you actually to the website, which actually outlines some use cases. So if you go to gimbal.com and you click on the use cases, it'll talk to you about some of the larger deployments that we've done with the tech and what those use cases are. One, for instance, as you'll see here, and I don't know if the WebEx windows here are covering any of this up and you're able to see it or not. One is venues. So, for instance, NFL stadiums, for example, being able to, within the stadium itself, detect proximity and then interact with your users for multiple engagements. For instance, directing them to a shorter line at the stadium, directing them to a shorter line for concessions. Again, offering specials. Again, the use cases, there are several of them here related to venues, brands and retailers, agencies and advertisers, and solution providers. And then developers, and this, in general is, hey, this technology, it tells you, one, related to geofencing, where you are geospatially, or two, related to beacons, your proximity to a beacon, which may or may not be stationary. And there are many uses for very interesting use cases that we've seen. Some others around venues that have already been put in place are museums, where beacons have been added invisibly to museums, and the museum applications help to guide you through the museum itself, give you additional information that the exhibits themselves can't feed to you through the museum's application. Okay, and yes, so that question was from Tom. I did answer it verbally. I'm also going to type in here that use cases are available at Gimbal.com. So yeah, so I verbally answered that. I can also point you to our website, which does have some of the standard use cases that we've addressed in the real world to date. Okay, so let's see. No other Q&A right now that I'm seeing that we need to address. So what I'm going to do, okay, so one more from Tom. Do we have any use cases in manufacturing? Not any that we've documented. And when you say manufacturing, nothing explicitly is coming to mind, but that's a great segue into the next presenter here from Gimbal. So I'm going to pass off presentation to Sid. Sid's our customer engineering lead, and he has personally been involved in almost all the larger deployments of our beacons that have gone on. He will probably be able to answer that for sure. And he will also talk to you about these real-world deployments and what types of things you need to take into account as you're deploying our beacons in these type of real-world scenarios. So without belaboring that any longer, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can pass the presentation off to Sid and have him take over.
Thank you, Gary. Hopefully everyone's able to see my screen. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes speaking about beacon deployments and, beacon deployments in the real world, things you should keep in mind when you decide to install beacons in your physical space or for your application to trigger content. Just to finish off that thought on the question of manufacturing, we have seen some implementations in sort of asset tracking use cases. So we have our, Gary showed on our store, on our Gimbal store, we have various form factors of beacons, and the Series 10 beacons it's a small key fob, so it actually is a pretty good fit for manufacturing type of use cases where you would tag that beacon to an asset and then use either a mobile app or a receiver to essentially keep track of what assets are in the room or how assets are coming in and out of an area. So that is something that we've definitely seen implemented. There was another question. I'd also answer that before I go into speaking about the beacon deployments. The question is, will Gimbal Manager work with Apple's iBeacon spec? So the Gimbal beacons themselves, the Series 21 beacons, Gimbal beacons are fully iBeacon certified, so they do transmit iBeacon transmission, also iBeacon packet too. So yes, they will work with Apple's iBeacon specification also. Okay, jumping into my presentation. So beacon installation. When you decide to hey, put beacons in a physical space, just some things to keep in mind, and we also provide some tools to help you test if your beacon install is effective, if it's going to work with your application, and I'll go into some of that also. First one, physical security. So this one's real basic. Depending on what physical space you're looking at to install beacons, you would want to install these devices out of normal human reach, so that just so you don't have cases of someone vandalizing the beacons or taking away the beacons, and installing them out of normal human reach, typically at even just 10 to 12 feet high. It also helps with signal propagation because beacons are RF devices, and RF doesn't transmit well through human bodies, for example. So if you put it at 3, 4, 5 foot high from the ground, and if you have people walking around, that will obstruct with your beacon transmission. So putting it out of normal human reach and at a height also helps a lot in terms of getting good signal propagation in that area for your beacons. And so I touched upon that, signal propagation. So a good clear line of sight is always helpful when you're trying to install beacons in a space. Hey, if you install it behind a concrete wall or inside a metal box, that will not be an ideal location for installing a beacon, because you want the signal to propagate so that users who are walking around with their devices, which have apps installed on them, the devices will be able to sight the beacons, and then the app is able to trigger the experience you want them to trigger. So having a clear line of sight is always definitely helpful. We provide an application called the Gimbal Beacon Manager, and I have a slide next just to show a screenshot. It's on the iOS App Store, so you can download it, and I'll go into how you would use that to also test your beacon install. Battery replacement. So if you're using the battery-powered beacons, definitely one more thing to keep in mind is, install the beacons in a manner which allows either you or, if you're installing it in, say, a retailer, the operational teams to have access to the beacons using simple tools like as simple as a ladder to get to the beacon and to be able to replace batteries. It's not something you'd be doing often, but when it's time to, at least it makes it easy. And it makes it easy from a maintenance standpoint to be able to have easy access to the beacon, at least to the right personnel to check on the beacon or to replace the battery on the beacon. One of the other things was, when Gary was going to the Gimbal Manager, what the platform does is it actually sends an email alert to the owner of the beacon if and when the battery state changes. So by default, when you first power the beacons and activate them, they're at full battery status. So when it goes from full to medium or medium to low, as a beacon owner, you get an email about it from the system. So when the beacon battery is low, you have a few weeks before you can plan replacing those beacons. So the beacons won't just die on you and stop working where you don't know what happened. So the system keeps alerts the beacon owners of the state of the battery state of the beacons, which definitely helps, especially when you start thinking about large-scale deployments. Beacon density. So that's another question that commonly comes up. How many beacons do I need? So the answer to that is, it depends a lot on the use cases. Depends on, if you just want to, say, welcome someone in a small, 10, 20 feet area, think of a store entrance or even a stadium entrance, 1 or 2 beacons will just, will be fine. But if you want to now start ranging for where exactly users are within a physical space, if someone is 5 feet away from this point of sale or concession counter, or 10 feet away from this display. Then you start looking at putting beacons in very specific areas, and then you also need a higher number of beacons because you want to very reliably know where exactly they are in that physical space. And so also when you look at beacons, think of them as they allow you to know very accurately and very reliably if someone is within inches of a particular beacon, if someone is within a 3-foot, 5-foot, or 10-foot range. But once you get outside of those ranges, once you get outside of, say, you're in a 20-foot or 50-foot, 20 to 30-foot range, at that point you can still reliably and fairly easily say that they are there. But it's more difficult to exactly range to know whether they're 25 feet away versus 35 feet away. And so definitely think of, hey, if you want to know exactly where users are, you definitely want to put more beacons in there so you can have strong signal that allows you to range. And obviously, if you look at areas that are bigger than 50 to 100 foot, that's where geofencing comes in. So you can essentially marry up both the technologies to have a user experience when, hey, someone has entered the parking lot or walked into the store versus now they're at the point of sale or in a particular department or in a particular section of the store, if I use the retail as an example. Site survey. So another important step in, when you decide to roll out beacons, roll out your application with beacons is whichever physical space you're targeting. Typically, customers spend time doing a site survey at one or two of the locations. And so a site survey essentially is, you'll take some beacons, install them or put them in areas you think they need to go in. And also when you think of, hey, where do these beacons need to go, there's no one right area or one right area to put the beacons in. There can be several areas in a particular location which may be appropriate to install beacons. And so the best way to find out if that beacon install will work for what your application intends to do is to do a site survey. So essentially, you would install, place beacons in the store. We have an application in the App Store called the Gimbal Beacon Manager. It's a free app to download. So essentially what it allows you to do is once you activate the beacon, the Gimbal Beacon Manager app allows you to see the signal strength of the beacons that are in your space and that are active in your account. So as an example, you want to trigger something when the user's app sees a beacon at minus 75 signal strength or stronger. So essentially, you would place the beacon there, walk around with your iOS device with the GBM app, the Gimbal Beacon Manager app running, and GBM will show you the signal strength of, as you walk away from the beacon, you will see the signal strength go down. So let me bring up my browser here, actually. Hopefully you're able to see this. So I'm just going to show you screenshots in the app. As you can see, it shows you the signal strength for your various beacons. For example, the last one here, it says store beacon 248. Okay, I'm fairly close to the beacon, and okay, this is the point at which I want something to happen in the app. So you would actually then put a value like this, and Gary showed you the place settings. So you would put your arrival RSSI at, say, something like minus 55, and so you're essentially telling the system and the SDK that when my user walks into this space and sees this beacon, store beacon 248, at any signal stronger than 55, and you decided that number was 55 based on the site survey testing you did. So you tell the app that do something or, either show a coupon, show a message, or capture that event that my user walked into this area using the SDK. So the GBM app essentially allows you to do a site survey, decide how and when your app should trigger things when and how close or far it needs to be from beacons, and what those values need to be in the platform, in Gimbal Manager for your places that you have defined. So again, it's a free app called Gimbal Beacon Manager. It's only on the iOS App Store. You can download it on your iOS devices, and once you get beacons, Gimbal beacons, you can use that to test if the beacons are functioning, and also, as I said, it helps you decide how and where to install beacons in your physical space. I think that's essentially the content I had. I definitely wanted to spend more time speaking about any use cases or any real world deployment questions that anyone on the call may have, and Gary can also jump in and answer questions here. So one of the questions is from Anthony, are there any plans for an outlet-powered gimbal device? So yes, we do have powered beacons that are going to be coming out soon. So one of the form factors we will have is a USB-powered beacon. And so you should see that available on the store shortly in the next few weeks. But by far, I would say the battery power are the most popular we've seen, just because battery power allows you to have that flexibility to place them anywhere, literally in your physical space. But no, we are going to have some powered beacons also. Question from Tom here, how accurate is the position and how repeatable? Good question, Tom. So as I mentioned, when you look at ranging something from the beacon in, accurately knowing someone's position inside of a 10 feet distance from the beacon is very, very accurate, and you can actually set it to trigger uniformly across multiple devices. Outside of that range, it is also very accurate to detect when someone enters that area, because in some cases, like hey, if it's an entrance, you necessarily don't necessarily care where they are, but you just want to know when they walked into the entrance. So that also is very accurate. It is fairly repeatable also. As I mentioned, when you install beacons in a physical space, you do need clear line of sight because objects and human bodies can interfere. But if you use some of the basic principles of hey, install them at 10, 12 feet high. You've done a site survey, so you know that the beacons are going to, that the beacons are installed at the right location. Then it's very repeatable in the sense you shouldn't see any significant variance in terms of users getting different behaviors, or for example, climate change impacting it significantly and things like that. We also do have some basic documentation on beacon installs. And so if you go to gimbal.com/docs, and I went to overview and proximity overview, there's a beacon installation page in here which talks about some of the basics about, hey, I went over these presence versus proximity, physical security, signal propagation, and battery replacement. So it talks about some of the things I just presented on the slide, which will help you if and when you're looking to install beacons. Can Wi-Fi interfere with beacons? Again, great question. So the answer is, beacons are designed to work in the Bluetooth Low Energy as a technology is designed to work in it operates in the 2.4 gigahertz space, which is same as Wi-Fi. Although the technology is designed to sit alongside Wi-Fi. So gimbal beacons, they transmit non-connectable Bluetooth Low Energy advertisements, and so they actually sit in channels 37, 38, 39, which in the spectrum space is in the channel, it sits between Wi-Fi. So we actually have not seen any interference, and we've had multiple deployments and done multiple testing. So typically, you would not expect any Wi-Fi interference because the technology is designed to operate alongside Wi-Fi. And there's actually a very good EE Times article which speaks about the technology, how Bluetooth Low Energy works alongside Wi-Fi. I'm going to paste that in here just so everyone has it, and it's a very good read if anyone wants to read up on how it can coexist alongside Wi-Fi. Unable to send the link, but we'll get that link sent out. So the question is, can you give me a number on the positioning accuracy? As an example, I can identify a position within 2 centimeters, 1 feet. Yeah, absolutely. You can do all those use cases are definitely doable. Example question is, could I use a beacon to position a robot or a drone? Sure, we've actually seen that done at a couple of other hackathons and a couple of experiments where we've seen drones. People have drones who they've made it work with gimbal beacons, and so it actually works pretty well. And you could definitely do that sort of positioning at that sort of distances in within 1 foot, 2 foot, or 3 foot area ranges. Again, I would say use the Gimbal Beacon Manager app with the beacons to look at what signal strength you need to use to decide that, hey, this is the range at which you need to take some action. But those sorts of distances definitely allow you to do very accurate experiences. So another question is, how often should the batteries be replaced? So our Series 21 beacons, let me go to the store here. Our Series 21 beacons, they come with 4 AA batteries installed, and those actually run for 18 months at least. So you wouldn't be looking at replacing batteries on them more than once every 18 months. The Series 10 beacons, they are designed primarily for foreground-only use cases. And so they run by default. The battery on them, it's a coin cell 2032 battery, and that runs about 3 to 4 months. Cool. So it looks like there's, unless there's any other questions, there's a question there from Anthony. Is there a cost associated with Gimbal Manager? So to see all our costs associated with the platform, you actually get to just download the SDK and play around with it. It's actually free for you to do, but there is a fee schedule in Gimbal Manager, and so that essentially explains what our fee schedule is for use of the platform. And this fee schedule includes the SDK and all the features you see in the Gimbal Manager, so it's not a per feature fee. So I'm going to send this link off, but you can read off on this fee schedule.
All right, so if there are no further questions, we can go ahead and close out the session. Thank you, Gary and Sid, for presenting today. This presentation and all of our other Bootstrap Week presentations will be made available next week on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/attdev and on our AT&T Developer Portal blog at developer.att.com. And thank you again, everyone, for participating in this session. If this interested you, please see our other Bootstrap Week presentations going on tomorrow and you can register for those at attdeveloper.webex.com. And thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.